Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. When I recorded this video, an installment in my series about the origins of individual rune shapes, trying to see if any individual rune suggests that its shape must come from some particular donor alphabet, I didn't know that later in the same month, January 2023, the world's oldest known runestone would be discovered in Ringerike, Norway. If you haven't seen already, I did a video about the basic facts concerning this find, and another with an interview with one of the scholars who has looked at it in person, Christer Vashus at the University of Bergen. Now, that inscription does not have, or none of the inscriptions in question, there's actually multiple inscriptions, have the rune letter H that I have seen, but there is one implication, I think, even in these inscriptions for the shape of the letter H in runes and for many of the other letters, and that's in the fact that in this new inscription from Ringerike, there is a letter B which has 4 pockets rather than 2. And that reminded me quite a bit of the way that the rune letter H sometimes has 1 diagonal line and sometimes 2, and wondering just how much some of the variation in runes, both that catches on, like the 2 diagonal lines in H do in the continent outside of Scandinavia, and the ones that don't catch on, like as far as I know, there are no other occurrences of that 4-pocket B, and I don't think Christer had ever seen it either. How much some of that may just have been sort of one-time playfulness. And wondering just, does this make it all the harder to figure out where any particular rune shape comes from, given that there has evidently been, whether playfully motivated or otherwise motivated, a fair amount of change of these characters, even within one set of runes, like the Elder Futhark or Younger Futhark. So it just means that, in a sense, we're maybe on all the shakier ground as far as establishing where the shapes of individual runes come from. Although I still maintain that we do not have to trace it to the Roman alphabet, just because of convenience in place and time. There are so many archaic features about the meta way that runes are written that I suspect that there's some other intermediating alphabet there. And the greater age of the Ringerike inscriptions also pushes back our timeline for when runes might first have been developed. Anyway, I just wanted to point out that I am still thinking about these questions, and I am quite willing to have some discovery prove me wrong someday. The point is not for me to be right per se. The point is to do justice to the evidence as it exists and as I understand it, and to present it in an honest and faithful light to you.
Archaeology is the search for fact, not truth. If it's truth you're interested in, Dr. Tyree's philosophy class is right down the hall.
And if I'm wrong about my individual speculations, who cares? No one will remember whether I'm right or wrong anyway. It's just part of the forward march of scholarship, and I know there are more new finds to be announced even in the earlier part of this very year. So we'll see just how much I will have either been slightly prescient or proved slightly or greatly wrong. For now, thank you, Patreon, to everyone else from beautiful Colorado. All the best, and here's the video from earlier this month. Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Jackson Crawford, and I'm back with another installment in my infrequently continued series of looking at the origins of specific rune letters. 1-minute disclaimer about audio that you can fast forward through if you've heard this before. Don't care. There's probably nothing people complain about as much as having a hard time hearing me. I'm a quiet talker by nature. Yes, I know that probably sounds strange in someone who made a living teaching in large auditoriums, but it's a fact. And I'm also not a great technology user. I have an old microphone and then a new microphone that I got. Trying to work with my iPhone that I record these videos with, and neither one is working. I need to track that down, but I make videos at certain times because, you know, I also have to work on books and things like that. So probably, hopefully by the time you see this, I've got that problem solved, but you know, I do upload videos weeks or months in advance of when they are published. All right, well, audio disclaimer over. Someone will still skip that disclaimer and then complain about the audio. I want to start off here today talking about a rune letter that is not diagnostic, but the way that it's not diagnostic is really interesting, and that is the H rune. So the H rune looks like an H, right? And by this point in our series of looking at rune letters, we really need to admit that we have a critical mass of runes that are explainable by referring to an alphabet that is Greek or Roman or derived from a Greek or Roman alphabet. Now, that's not getting us to a specific satisfying answer, but it's a reminder that when you have an F that looks like an F, when you have a U that looks like an upside down U, when you have an R that looks like an R, a K that looks like a C, and an H that looks like an H, we're really talking about something that's clearly in the Mediterranean family of alphabets, right? It might not be directly derived. In fact, I'm sure it's not directly derived from the classical Greek alphabet of, you know, sorority row or the Roman alphabet that we use today, but it's related to them somehow. This is a critical point to drive home because sometimes people treat rune origins like they're a total mystery, like they must have just originated out of, you know, the head of Zeus, or, well, actually the head of Odin is the appropriate analogy here. But that's not what happened, right? They are derived from some weird transmission of a Greek or Roman or related alphabet. Okay, now it's worth noting that sometimes the H rune is used as evidence that, well, it must actually be from the Roman alphabet rather than from a Greek-derived alphabet, because it's the Romans who use H to mean huh, right, the consonant, like we use in a word like house or hard or here. Whereas the Greeks use it as a vowel, eta, right, as in the long vowel A. But that is not entirely true. The Romans get that H letter from the Etruscans, who got it from Greeks, who in the Western Greek world, and in fact, even in archaic Athens, used eta as, well, heta, as an H consonant, just like the Romans. Romans got this from somewhere, right? The use of eta as a vowel, as a long E, is in fact an innovation in the classical Greek alphabet that we know from, you know, Attic Ionic documents, the stuff that people mostly read in ancient Greek and modern Greek, after those dialects had lost H in some positions. So it is entirely possible that the alternative, somewhat disfavored now theory that I still am very sympathetic toward, that the runes are taken from a Greek or very Greek adjacent version of this alphabet, it's still very much possible, right? H was used in the Greek-speaking world as an H. Okay, another thing that's kind of interesting to note here is there's two widespread versions of the H rune, potentially named hagalaz in Proto-Germanic times when the Elder Futhark was in use. We see a single bar version, mostly in Scandinavia, and a double bar version, mostly in West Germanic speaking areas. I don't think this is very diagnostic. The earliest inscriptions that we have, although they're also sort of regionally biased because for the most part these are going to come from Scandinavia, have the single bar H, and the very fact that the model in a Greek or Roman alphabet would have the single bar makes me say, well, the single bar is the older form. That could be disproven if there's a very, very old inscription proven to have that double H, the double bar H. I don't know if that's likely by my lights. I wouldn't put money on it because, in fact, the very oldest inscription that we can confidently date, the Vimos Acom, has that single bar H. And in fact, if you look at it, really has a very straight horizontal line in it, which looks more like a Greek or Roman H. It doesn't have that kind of characteristic diagonal side internal line like your classic Elder Futhite runes. So probably the single bar H is older. I'm open to the possibility that the double bar H could reflect some kind of ancient derivation from, some variation of a Greek or Roman or Etruscan or North Italic alphabet that used that, but I haven't seen one outside of that West Germanic speaking world, so I don't think that's the older form. Now, the last time that I was going to make an installment in the Rune Origin series, I had intended to do this video about the H rune, and then I wound up looking at what could potentially be the oldest example of an H rune in writing a Germanic word, which is the Nego helmet. And I wound up just making a whole video about the Nego helmet itself, which you can go look at. Now, the Nego helmet, you could still kind of flip a coin and say, is this early runes? Is this leading in a direct line to the inscriptions that we see from a couple centuries later in the Germanic speaking world in Germanic languages? Or is this an isolated instance of an Etruscan or Etruscan adjacent alphabet being used to write a Germanic name, probably in a community not speaking a Germanic language, and it just happens to be that the runes are derived from an alphabet like this? That may sound like an unimportant point, but it's a really important point. I tend to think probably 5149 or maybe like 5248 that it's the latter case, and this isn't a direct ancestor to the runic alphabet. There's enough things that are different, and one of the things that's different is the H, because we see that the H is actually a box, right? It's closed in. It looks like a boxy number 8 on an alarm clock rather than an H. Now, that variant of H is known in Archaic Greek alphabets too, but I don't think, and I could be wrong, but I've never seen it that I can recall in a Futhark inscription, a connected text in a Germanic language. So either you have a situation where this is the origin of hagalaz, right, the rune for the H sound, and somewhere along the line it lost the bar at the top and the bottom, maybe because it's come into contact with and been influenced by a Roman H, something like that. But it's also, I think, likely this is just a variation that we're seeing in this particular area in Eastern Europe a couple hundred years before runes are in frequent use, or we have evidence of runes being in frequent use, and it's in a community where it's not a Germanic language that's being written, and Harigast, the name that we see in the Nego helmet, is just an isolated Germanic name that's written down there, just like I can write down, a name like, oh my gosh, isn't it ridiculous that I can't think of examples, but like Anders isn't an English name, right? But I can write it down in an English sentence because I'm talking about a guy named Anders. That could be the context of Harigast on the Nego helmet. It's in a context that's Celtic speaking, or even like Etruscan speaking, or Venetic speaking, or something like that. Someone is writing down a Germanic person's name, but he isn't necessarily, it's not necessarily a Germanic speaking community. Okay, so I don't think that the box shape on the Nego helmet necessarily tells us anything about the continuous tradition of runic writing that we see, starting with definitely the Vimos Acom in the mid-100s AD, where we see, again, an extremely Roman or Greek-looking H. So H is not diagnostic, and that in itself is kind of fascinating, because on the surface, if you take on good faith the notion that, well, the runes come from somewhere, the argument that's so common among historians and archaeologists and linguists now, that, well, it must be derived from the Roman alphabet because it makes sense based on the cultural context, right? We know that Germanic and Scandinavian speaking people are coming in contact with Romans, or people who are in contact with the Romans at about the time that runic inscriptions start appearing. It's appealing to just say, well, okay, so it's from the Roman alphabet. But we have to remember that H can be from other places, including directly from a Greek alphabet, as long as it's something that's not derived from the classic Attic Ionic alphabet. Now, on its own, if all that we knew about the runes was that H looked like an H, I would say, yeah, okay, there's pretty good evidence that it's just from the Roman alphabet. But together with the fact that we have letters that look diagnostically Greek, and I'll just cite my favorite example, which is the O, I think that there's pretty good evidence still that it's derived from a Greek alphabet, or potentially from a North Italic, Etruscan-derived alphabet that's derived from an archaic variant of the Greek alphabet, and maybe that the H shape is reinforced by contact with Roman writing, but that it's not originally from that. Still, H on its own can't tell us the origin of the runes. Well, thank you so much to my Patreon supporters for continuing to make these videos possible, and by making these videos possible, make my other endeavors, like writing my books, currently my 5th book, An Introduction to Reading Old Norse for people new to it, possible. I still able to make a living 3 years after quitting teaching by talking about my field of expertise and beautiful places that I love. I hope you can see and enjoy this beautiful view of Pikes Peak to my north. Kind of a seldom seen view. You've got to really be out here in the Colorado Sticks to see that, but boy, do I love being out in the Colorado Sticks. So from beautiful Colorado, please know that I am thanking you at Patreon from the bottom of my heart, and everyone out there, I'm wishing you all the best.